Petra, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Hi, I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to talk about brands committing to SEO, especially because there is a tendency for brands to sort of like treat SEO almost like a tick box, something they feel they need to have. So they go ahead and invest in SEO, but aren't really committed to SEO. And I know you've talked about this pretty recently. So I wanted to get your take on a number of questions around brands committing to SEO. But as I like to do with all my SEO guests, I like to ask them how they got into SEO in the first place. So with that said, how did you become an SEO professional?
Sure. So the way how I got into SEO, I actually did a digital marketing course as my master's for university, which led me to a web design agency. And that's where I sort of read more about SEO and understood more how it works. And because previously I've always been interested in understanding both technology, but also users and organic marketing, this was kind of the right fit for me. So I was very specific with my SEO career in terms of actually looking for SEO jobs as an entry role to get into it.
Mm. Would you say you have a favorite area or pillar of SEO?
No, I really can't pick favorites. I've done all sorts from content, technical, local SEO. I've worked with PR teams on outreach, and I would say that what I really find amazing about SEO is the variety of things that you can do with it and work with different teams. So if I would have to say my favorite part, it's probably strategy, consulting, talking to people, understanding issues, and sort of just seeing how SEO can help different parts of the business.
Mm. And I noticed you've worked you've worked client side for a number of brands. Why is there a specific reason why you chose client side rather than agency?
So I think for me, I felt that in terms of doing anything with organic marketing, doing anything with trying to improve brand awareness, trying to bring more traffic to the site, I can do that better if I understand the brand, if I understand the area, their customers. So the first company I picked specifically was a travel company and then a fashion brand. And both of those were brands that I was really interested in, and I was interested in the products they sell. So I felt that was kind of more my control zone, more my comfort zone, and I could also find more motivation to actually do the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I think with brands, you actually get to be an SEO marketer as opposed to agency side selling SEO as a service or a product. So it's very interesting how SEOs who are client sides, they very much focus on working to improve the brand. I feel like they are very much integrated into marketing rather than trying to just sell a service, which is more akin to agency side SEOs, in my opinion. Now, getting on to the main topic, from an overall point of view, why do you think SEO strategies fail with some brands?
Well, I think you've obviously mentioned some of the talks I've done last year. And one of the biggest things I found that makes strategies fail is really a lack of commitment. So it's really getting into something I call a buy-in-ish cycle, which essentially just means that it looks like you're getting buy-in from your stakeholders, from your decision makers, but actually it's not real buy-in, it's fake buy-in, it's lacking commitment. And that means there is no accountability when it comes to execution. And we all know that if things don't get implemented, there will be no results, which eventually will cause strategies to fail.
Okay, so let's delve a bit deeper into that. The buy-in process. You mentioned three aspects. Fake buy-in, which leads, I think you mentioned like a cycle. You have fake buy-in, which leads to partial results, which leads to a lack of proof, which again leads to fake buy-in, and the cycle continues. So from a business leadership point of view, what does fake buy-in look like?
So I think the real challenge with fake buy-in is that it looks like you're getting buy-in. You are getting a yes. You are getting a budget approved. You are getting headcount. You are getting something, but there is always a but. So and that's really the challenge of it. You're getting a budget, but there isn't sort of a plan to actually do anything with that budget. Let's say that budget is to hire an agency and to do maybe some specific project that you would implement, maybe create some content for your website, but actually there wasn't any buy-in from specific stakeholders. So your content team is actually saying, well, we are not happy with that. We're not going to publish it. The implementation gets pushed out. And then all of that money that you've got approved and spent on that agency, let's say, now doesn't actually get implemented. So you're not seeing results. Or it could be the same with headcount, but you're not getting the sort of the right amount of budget that you need for the skills. And while, it's really important to hire junior people and train them, it always means more work for you. So if were trying to hire someone because you were already sort of overwhelmed with work, then probably you're not going to have time to train someone, and that will just cause more and more problems in the long run.
Wow. It's amazing how these common traits are across a number of brands, and I know a number of SEOs will be relating to this, and especially those who are client-side SEOs, because there is almost this thing where business leadership sort of like commits to SEO. Sorry, sort of buy into SEO, as you put it, fake buy-in. So they think or they feel they need SEO because they've sort of like come across it within some of their overall digital marketing training, and they invest in SEO. But that commitment isn't there it's not really there from a leadership point of view. So they don't really support it. And it's also not there from an operational point of view. So stakeholders, as you mentioned, they don't buy into SEO. They almost feel like it's something that the business has to do. And it's something that SEO does. So it's not their problem. So heads of departments, non-SEO departments, don't commit to SEO. So you have a situation where business leadership are not really invested in SEO from a commitment point of view. And also sort of like the leaders across different departments who should ideally support SEO are not supporting SEO. So SEO continually remains as a silo and there's a lot of firefighting and issues that this singular SEO, whether it's a person, a team, a small team, or a person and external team, i.e. an agency, have to deal with. And that leads into partial results. Partial results are because there are workarounds, and workarounds are SEOs have to carry out workarounds because there isn't a commitment to implementation. Right. So an SEO strategy isn't fully being implemented, and that leads to workarounds. What are some of the workarounds that you've seen SEOs have to carry out?
So I think you touched upon so many interesting points there with the silos, with how people sort of see SEO and then say that they invest in it, but what does that actually mean? I think in terms of the workarounds, a lot of times SEOs just end up sort of putting out fires, right? So you have a strategy, but actually what you end up doing is just running to different teams, let's say to the development team after every single sprint because something went wrong. So you have this huge list of technical tasks that would need to get implemented and added, but you're not even getting to that. Or maybe, you're part of those sprint conversations, those prioritization conversations, but every time there are just new issues because there is not a level of understanding of how the company should be looking at SEO overall. And that comes back to sort of lack of education, lack of understanding within the team, and lack of processes as well. So I think the main sort of workaround that I've seen is, first of all, just, focusing more on putting out fires. And then the second one is potentially outsourcing to agency and trying to do separate things. Like, I've worked with huge brands where it was so difficult sometimes to work with the development team that you would set up your, subdomain or use some reverse proxy to mask it as part of the website, but you just own your own little project and your own little SEO bubble and focus on that part of the site. And you can achieve results with that for sure. And you can use those as proof and you can do things with it. I'm not saying that, doing any of those are wrong, but it's important to be aware that this is a workaround solution and to have a plan on how am I going to use this to actually now educate the teams to actually achieve that higher goal, which is improving that process, which is getting, the leadership team to actually give me real buy-in, to actually give me commitment and to fully invest into SEO.
Now, workarounds, it's an issue that I think leads to results not being what business leadership can potentially consider good results. What I mean by this is, we tend to look at SEO as a channel that improves upon the current state, right? But it's also a channel that prevents issues from occurring in the first place. And sometimes the workarounds, you might have a workaround that's getting a little bit of results. So it's showing progress, right? But it's more importantly preventing a lot of issues from occurring. So it's stuck between this sort of like place where you're getting a little bit of results, but more importantly, preventing a lot of issues from occurring. And because most of the time workarounds is spent on preventing issues, you're not fully able to show what SEO can do. How is this? How can business leaders better understand this area where, okay, SEO can improve, but at the moment we're stopping issues from occurring? If we want to improve, we need to do X, Y, and Z. How can this be better communicated to business leaders?
So again, this is a very, very interesting and very important point, which I think SEO struggle with because it's very difficult to prove. And a lot of times what I've heard from leaders is like, how do you prove that certain numbers, certain revenue impact is incremental to something, right? So when you make SEO changes, how do you prove that incremental value? And it's the same with losses. How do you prove that? Obviously, you can go out there, you can show sort of case studies, use cases of what happened to other brands potentially, and you can leverage some of those to educate. But it is a very difficult challenge if leadership doesn't actually understand how Google works, for example, how algorithms works, how search engines work. And, as much as I would like to say, oh, by now, most business owners understand that, we all know that that's not true. And so that's why, again, this comes back to education, and it can be very, very challenging to educate leadership teams. And not only because they don't have the time, but also you don't want to sound patronizing. Either leadership teams don't necessarily want to be educated. And I think that's where things like storytelling become very, very important. So whenever you're trying to get buy-in, how do you tell a story? How do you bring examples of your customers and how certain things are impacting them? How do you actually use a story to explain something very complex, which are, how algorithms work, how AI, ChatGPT is changing, the current landscape? how do you actually create a story around that and explain it better so you gain some understanding?
I often say that SEO remains very new in digital marketing, even though it's not the newest channel. So social media is newer than SEO, but for some reason it's SEO that's the most difficult to grasp, whether business level or from an operational level. What do you think it is about SEO that makes it very unique in the marketing sphere for business leaders?
Yeah, I think with social media, I mean, first I wanted to say, like, people maybe understand social media better because they use it so much, but that's not true, because obviously we all use Google, but I think
we all Google. Yeah,
people just kind of separate that out completely, like in terms of there are sort of a couple of challenges here that I see with social media. They change a lot, and I'm not a social media expert, so again, don't, it's for me to sort of understand what's happening with social media or search engines. I think there is a lot of human to human interaction there that you can report on, and when it comes to search engines, there's been so much improvement in terms of how we measure things, for example, how we report on things. And that makes it really, really challenging, because there's been a time before where, the best practices that I think white hat SEOs, if we still, label white hat SEOs or just genuine SEOs, always advocated for, but it didn't necessarily work that much, or black hat SEO tactics worked much better. So even if from the beginning you were advocating for the same thing, measuring that and proving that have been much more challenging and actually maybe not as effective. It's becoming more and more effective, and I think those principles actually stayed the same, but to prove it is a completely different thing. While in social media, sort of human reactions and emotions and viral content and things like that have been there from the very beginning. So it's so reactive, I think, to that human behavior and to that emotional part, that maybe that's sort of where that real challenge comes from.
I've been pondering this for literally years now, right? And I think if I were to give a judgment on the way business leaders view SEO, I'd say they think of it as keywords, rankings, and links, right? Which in some regard is the case, but it's a lot more complex than that, especially these days, right? But all of that rhetoric comes from SEOs, right? We've shaped the way SEO is viewed. And I feel like we're now at a stage where to change that perception of SEO is a mountain of a challenge to tackle. Do you think it's something that can be achieved to change the perception of SEO? Do you think it's something that can be achieved relatively easily, let's say?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think we could talk about that for hours, but it's a very interesting one, because I do think the perception is changing, and I think even just the way how conferences grow, the way how Brighton SEO is growing and it's becoming so much more a digital marketing conference. There are so many different digital marketers attending it and just coming from that. It will always come from the SEO background, even if we add things to it, which is brilliant, because that's exactly where SEO should be and what it should do. So I do think it is changing, and I think communities like the Women in Tech SEO community and things what they are doing, podcasts like yours and the work you're doing, all of this is incredibly helpful to change that perception. And I think just with years as well, obviously, the longer it's been around, the more it will become an important thing to focus on, and the more sort of Gen Z will become, the next business leaders, and they grow up with these things and they learn them from a much younger age. I do believe that it will change, because it just has to change. The question is, how much the technology will change by then, so all of our knowledge will be outdated. But yeah, another thing I wanted to mention here is that, because I've been traveling around the world for the last four months now, that when I was still back in London last year, I think a lot of times we think within our own sort of bubble of companies we work with, the bigger tech companies, e-commerce companies. Even when we talk about small companies, there are people who, have digital knowledge, who have access to, Google every day and just use their phones every day. Traveling around Asia has been quite interesting for me, seeing how, for example, in India, any business owner, any local cafe, anyone I spoke to, they knew what SEO was. They said like, oh, we need help with that. Like, we've been trying this, we've been trying reviews. They would tell me so many things that just like some C-level executives don't know, like just some of the most basic best practices back in the UK. And then I'm traveling in Asia, and someone who just opened a local cafe, they know because they have to, because it's not a sort of, for them, it's not a question of like, we want to hit 10% growth by next year or something. For them, it's their living, it's their business, it's what they do every day. So they have to know. So I thought that was a really interesting thing, because sometimes in the UK, in the US, like we think, like we know so much about SEO and all of this knowledge is improving. And actually there are other parts of the world, like maybe what I'm trying to get back to is that in terms of the knowledge to sort of improve, I think there has to be an actual need rather than just those 10% growth, because it will probably always be easier to use advertisement to prove that it's that channel that achieved that 10% growth. So if business owners will have sort of more genuine reasons to say, or just different reasons in terms of why they want to achieve growth, we really want to understand our customers, what they are interested in. So that I think there has to be some element of that behind, rather than just, we need to hit this number. So if it's just about the number, it will always be very challenging.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of businesses, it's about the number, and they stick with that. They have that in mind, right? But what changes that is the ultimate change in SEO, which is an algorithm change, an algorithm change release or an update that somehow affects the business. And all of a sudden it becomes an agenda to have SEO first within not just marketing, but the entire business. They all of a sudden they get SEO, right? They see that actually workarounds are not really ideal. For SEO to be successful, we need this department, that department, this team, that team to work with SEO in order to have SEO recommendations or strategy implemented. And then it becomes quite a focus. But by then, it's already too late, right? They've already been hit by the algorithm. They've already lost what they had. So they've regressed in their SEO. And they now have to get back to parity before they can even consider the number that they had in mind, right? Is there a way to prevent this from happening in the first place?
I think yes. I think, and again, I will maybe bring an example here as well, and that example will be relevant to being focused on numbers. I'm not saying it will be possible to prevent all sort of algorithms impacting you. I don't think that's possible. But what are we really focusing on here? Are we focusing on a weekly number of how SEO is doing? Is traffic up or down, or is even revenue from SEO up or down? Because that will always be part of it. But what's the business goal behind that? Because, you know, if the SEO numbers are down, what does that mean? And again, let's bring an example of a small shop or something that's within your local area, and you've maybe they have menu updates and everything, and you search on Google and you can't find them in the first few results because, you know, it changed, like with an algorithm update hit them, maybe even, you know, like they disappeared or something tragic happened. Like, what do? You maybe go to Instagram or you go somewhere as a user. So if you look at it from the user's point of view, it's usually a lot more complex than that. If I'm looking for a solution, then, you know, there are other ways to find it. So if a business actually has all of those channels working together, then the end goal, the end revenue shouldn't necessarily be impacted that much. So yes, the SEO numbers might change still because of those algorithm changes, and that takes time to fix. And the business needs to understand that these things happen and they do take time to fix. But actually, there are other goals, there are other metrics that we should be measuring with SEO, because it brings us so many insights into, you know, user behavior and how people find us. And if we are using all of that, and if we are feeding all of that back to social media, for example, other marketing channels, you know, out of brand advertising, any of these that can also bring direct traffic, then those changes should impact us a lot less. And I'm not saying it will completely disappear. Like, obviously things can happen, but I think you can definitely minimize it to like a lot, and just by working together and really understanding what is SEO meant to do.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because as you were saying what you were saying, I was starting to think. I think again it comes down to SEOs and the way we've the rhetoric we have around SEO and the way non-SEOs have picked up on that rhetoric. I sometimes wonder how different SEO would be if Google weren't so dominant. Because, for example, I think of the ways that people search, right? Literally search, whether it's on YouTube, TikTok, even Instagram. And I consider that a part of SEO, because that's the way people search. And I think if SEOs consider the way people search as a core part of SEO, they then focus on users, and the rhetoric then changes, and that filters up to business leaders. It's funny you mentioned the way people in Asia treat SEO. They almost understand, or they get SEO for their business a lot better than business leaders in the Western world. And it's going to be very fascinating, I think, to see how that plays out, because I'm thinking of it from a bigger point of view. So if people in Asia, business leaders in Asia, have more understanding of their SEO, their business is going to perform a lot better than, let's say, a Western brand who has a presence in Asia. How does that then affect that business in Asia if they want to expand to other markets? You know, their internal knowledge of SEO will be filtered to the different markets that they focus on. And how does that then impact the brand in Asia versus the Western brand who has a presence in Asia? It's going to be very fascinating in the coming years. What's your take on the way business leaders in Asia, or let me rephrase that. Why do you think they have better understanding of SEO than business leaders in the Western world?
So, and again, my sort of sample size is, you know, people I spoke to throughout my travels and things like that, and they would be sort of owners of smaller businesses. So again, I cannot say for sure that, you know, across Asia the understanding is better or something like that. But what I've spotted from those conversations is that when you rely on your business for a living, and genuinely you need to make it work, and your business is, you know, a local business with a physical address. These were mainly the people I spoke to, or websites for tour guides, for example, and things like that. Then you have to understand how you reach your customers. So you have to learn those new things, even though you know, it's much more difficult for a lot of them to find a lot of the resources that we have available, because, you know, there are so many networking events, and you actually get access and you get exposure to brilliant people within the industry, which is much harder to find if you're not attending those conferences and don't have that network. And yet they still manage to find the information, they manage to test things out, and they know what works. So I still think that, you know, businesses, Western businesses potentially who have branches within Asia can certainly do really well, again, because they have a very different understanding, and they know how to, you know, they understand how the SERPs work, especially if they have an SEO team that can focus on localized content and things like that. But a lot of these small businesses will have other things that a bigger branch maybe wouldn't have, by understanding the local culture, by understanding, you know, how just how people act. So again, just an example here, and that's been in all of the countries I've been in Asia, which was Vietnam, Thailand, and India throughout my last few months, that even like people use Google My Business, especially for those reviews, menu listings, photos, videos, all of that. Opening hours, however, they just do not matter here, because it's usually a family-owned business or something. So if there is an emergency or something, like, they just don't open that day, or they just tell you that day when you go around, when is it going to open. And the culture around it here is that everyone knows that. So you don't really use opening hours to go and check when the cafe or the restaurant opens, or a local shop. You just go on, you know that you might need to go to the next one. But even when I was working back in the UK, like if I work with a client who has branches in Asia, then of course I would tell them that, you know, they have to update their opening hours everywhere, because we know it's important. And again, I'm not saying that that's not important, but I just know that within these areas that I've been to, they don't matter. And actually reviews and those photos and all of those things just matter so much more. And again, I haven't done a full study to understand if, you know, does Google understand this? Does Google prioritize certain things more? And does Google say, oh, okay, yeah, opening hours don't matter here? Like, I don't know if that's the case. But in terms of how I see the people I meet throughout my travels, how they interact with Google search, like, we still use it to find businesses, to find places, but in a very different way, how you would use it within the UK, or you might call. So the phone number on the listing is much more important, because you call and you ask when do they open. So there are just small sort of nuances that can be very challenging to understand unless you actually empower the people within that area, within that, you know, local market, because they will be able to tell you, because they potentially, you know, they live there, they are there, they understand the culture, they understand how things are working. So that's, I think those things are, there are different benefits. And I think brands will need to focus on some of these nuances a bit more, and maybe, I think in my ideal world, a lot of these things will improve some hierarchies and some processes, empowering people who face customers, empowering people with the knowledge, and actually letting them, you know, own their own decisions. And when I say that, I mean a big, maybe let's say clothing company who has a store within Asia might give a bit more power to the store manager who actually works in that specific shop, right? And I think that's always been a foundation of local SEO, to do that. Yeah. But it can be very difficult when you're talking to senior decision makers to explain to them why is that. And I'm hoping that will be better when you bring up some examples, when you explain and you try to increase some of this understanding, then hopefully these things can change, and business owners will realize that they do need to empower specific people with the knowledge within their businesses.
Yeah, it sounds as though a number of businesses who are successful with their SEO, they focus on their potential users. And that's my takeaway from what you've stated. And it reminds me once again that the users that we're trying to acquire, us as SEOs, us as businesses and brands, they're not necessarily our users, they're Google's users, right? And by focusing on the users, we acquire them from Google rather than trying to manipulate the search engine. In other words, by focusing on users, we get to carry out SEO in a much more proactive way, rather than reacting to issues that happen on the website. And it leads me into a wonderful quote from one of your talks. I think it was the London meetup one, where you mentioned SEO decisions are business decisions. And if you view SEO as a way of acquiring users via search engines, rather than trying to manipulate search engines or optimizing for search engines, it puts you in a very unique position where everything you do is for your users or potential users. And this again leads me to think of the way some brands think of SEO, even with the phrasing that they have with SEO. So they will say SEO keywords, which is one of the phrases that really get to me, because, you know, if a keyword is important for SEO, it's important to every other department that has a touch point with the website, right? So it's not SEO keywords. When I've worked with brands, I found that whenever they use exclusive terms like these SEO keywords, SEO pages, SEO campaigns, it's very much a case of, this is SEO work, we don't really want anything to do with it. And that, again, it keeps a barrier up, right, that allows different departments to push back on SEO requests. And that filters into not having SEO recommendations implemented, which is a huge shame. And you can see all of this dynamic in-house, right? When you worked in-house, did you see these sort of the dynamics where people didn't consider SEO decisions to be business decisions?
I think, again, both when I worked in-house and then when I worked with clients, it really depends how SEO is viewed within that business. So one of the companies I worked with as an SEO, I was part of the product team. And then another one, I was part of the marketing team. And there are huge differences within that, because when you're part of product, then I felt that it was a lot more collaborative in terms of SEO is part of the product, is part of the website, is part of what we do. Within marketing, it was just, a separate channel. So it was a lot more siloed. And I'm not even saying that it's, product is better than marketing. I think, again, it very much depends on the business goals. And I think there are justifications for both of those. But certainly SEO needs to be viewed as, just one component. And one thing that makes this really challenging that I've noticed with, a lot of clients as well, is always internal politics, internal hierarchy, budgets being allocated to separate teams. We can be very protective of those budgets. So it really becomes a challenge that way to then actually work together. And I mean, you say SEO campaign. To me, whenever someone says a campaign is SEO, it means that is coming out of the SEO team's budget. And also it's the SEO team who then will have to set the measurements. You have to, provide the numbers in terms of what did this campaign actually do. And the reason why it's labeled as well, because all other teams probably said, like, we don't have the budget to do anything with this. And and definitely makes it challenging, because as we know, there are very little things in SEO, and probably, over the years, it will be even harder to do siloed SEO projects and to prove the value of them, because they usually just, don't, they, SEO, as I said in the talk, SEO decisions are business decisions. SEO campaigns, SEO projects should really empower and help all of your other channels as well. And again, that's like one of the reasons I say this as well is because, back in the, I don't know, like even in the 60s when, marketing started, and it all started with doing user research and focus groups and going out on the street and asking the next 10 people who came up to you if they like this brand or that brand, and collecting data that way. Like now we have pretty much everyone across the world using search engines, and we are getting that data. Of course, that data is sampled, and there are other issues with that data that I won't go into, but we are getting a lot of information that is just incredibly beneficial. And especially if you can merge that data with, social media data, because there is as you said before as well, and I fully agree with that, like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they are all search engines as well. They are all based on a search engine where you will find content, and they all have algorithms. So all of that data is just so powerful to then make business decisions about your customers, who are, by the way, not a customer who goes on Google and never goes on Instagram and never goes somewhere else to look for your brand, right? Like this one customer touches all of those different channels, and if you don't merge the data, then you're looking at the same user, the same customer as, 6 different persons, 6 different points, and you're not connecting the dots. So yeah, I think that's incredibly important to make those connections and to understand the purpose of that search engine data, and how the decisions that you make will eventually impact that user who is actually interacting with your business across all other channels as well.
Yeah. When I think of users, the average user, non-SEO user, I should say, and the way they search on Google and TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, what have you, I would suggest that they don't necessarily differentiate search engine from social media. In other words, I would say most people, because they understand social media more, they almost treat Google as a social media. They know it's a search engine, but they treat it like a social media. And I'm wondering whether the updates Google are making is to cater for that expectation that the average user have. And if I think of the way the average user searches on these platforms, they are more brand led than generic keyword led, right? So when they search for stuff on Instagram, TikTok is a really big one, which has caught my attention for a number of months now. They are more interested in the brand as a keyword rather than just a generic keyword. And all of this, I think, is leading into a state where SEO is going to be very much integrated with a brand or the brand. And when I think of the work Jason Bernard is doing, and other people who talk about entity SEO, I think this is where it's headed. It's leading into a state where, okay, SEO, the understanding of it is probably going to be tied into the understanding of a brand and what users want and or expect from the brand when they search for the brand and all the entities associated with the brand, which is leading into a very fascinating reality, I think. And I'm wondering how the training of SEO is then going to be filtered into this dynamic, because it's going to lead into a place where a state, I think, where brands who get SEO are the ones who succeed in it. Brands who understand that if you have a website, you require SEO, right? And it's not just an investment in SEO, it's a commitment in SEO. From an SEO training point of view, firstly, how important is SEO training to non-SEOs?
Oh, I mean, again, I think how important is SEO training for, you mean like within business leader, non-SEOs, or within like a business for the other stakeholders?
Actually, interesting question. I'll say both. Not necessarily to do SEO, but training so they, if you like, upskilling their knowledge of SEO to the point where they competently understand SEO, not necessarily to become an SEO, but to, let's say, for business leaders, make better decisions with SEO or for SEO.
Yeah. So again, I think so my question would be like, what do we, or how do we think about SEO training? Because I've led internal sort of SEO sessions to different teams, both when I was in-house and when I was software side. So in order to help teams understand how search engines, how algorithms work, what are some of the best practices. So there will always be nuances to it, because let's say a user experience team needs to understand better, on-page elements and what are those. So there is some sort of technical knowledge there that needs to come with it. So I think anyone technical SEO should just be incorporated in the training that they're already doing, or even for a developer, right? Like they know that, clean code is important and all of those things. And if you can write something in 5 lines of code, then you shouldn't write it in 20, and you shouldn't leave all things there. But again, understanding maybe that importance of why and what it can cause potentially is can be significant, and just incorporating that. Like, it's not to say there's a separate SEO training that needs to happen. It's more, where can we sort of fill some of the gaps within technical training where SEO should be part of it. And I definitely think that that's happening. Like, even just, and my career in SEO started about 6 years ago. And certainly I can see that developers I'm working with now have a much better understanding of SEO than early in the days, where, if you put some keywords in white on a white background, then you're good to go. So you don't need to talk to the developer. Just as long as you have that section that you can fill in, it's fine. So it's, I definitely think that some of those are changing, but there is an other aspect to this, because I almost feel like just understanding search engines, just understanding the internet, like, let's go broader a bit, like understanding algorithms, understanding AI. A lot of these things should just be part of education. Like, I think in general, there is so much more to talk about within, like, how, teenagers can use the internet, or kids can use the internet. And there is not necessarily education in school in terms of how they are served content and things like that, which is definitely, not my area. But just as an SEO, I can see how, when I'm working with business leaders who didn't grow up with the internet, of course, there is a lack of knowledge potentially from there. But even today, when we use the internet on a daily basis, we use Google on a daily basis, where is the education? Where is, how are we making sure that everyone understands that if you ask for a fact, if you ask if the earth is flat and Google gives you an answer, then, like, that's, how much do you trust that, right? Like, where are these things coming from? Like, people need to have a bit more critical thinking, and people need to understand how technology changes. But as with technology, it usually tends to advance a lot faster than how education sort of catches up with it. So I think that education today is still very relevant, is still very important. There are different ways to do it, but I think as we sort of time passes, that education will change as well. So what you would teach to a development team, a content team, leadership today will be very different when leaders of different businesses have grown up with the internet, do understand how algorithms work. So SEO will probably again change by then. So there still might be need for education, but it will just be different. And yeah, I guess that's a very long answer to that question, but understand the audience and find where the gaps are and what you actually need to cover. Because not everybody needs to understand all of the on-page elements or crawling or crawl budgets, of course. But eventually people do want,
It's got to be appropriated training, hasn't it? So what web developers will know about SEO or should know about SEO will be different to what PR should know about SEO. And I think this awareness of SEO, this training of SEO needs to come from SEOs, either SEOs within the business, within one's brand, one's business rather, or within the SEO community. One of the my pet peeves about the SEO community is we focus too much on SEOs. We don't necessarily spread awareness of SEO to different departments. And from experience, the brands who have who focus on SEO training internally are those that succeed within their SEO journey. Because it shows on the SERPs, it shows on the website, it shows in the way non-SEOs behave operationally, that prevents issues from occurring in the first place. So it's not led to the SEO within a brand isn't at a state where they're firefighting anymore. They're actually being proactive with their SEO. And I think one of the best areas to be proactive with SEO is to have ongoing, perhaps training is too big of a word. Let's say spreading the awareness of SEO, right, to non-SEOs, because this essentially involves every single person who can impact the website. So it doesn't lead to SEO problems anymore. Now, I'm curious to know what your answer to this would be. SEOs, we sometimes consider SEO as more important, so SEO best practices as more important than what the business needs from an SEO point of view. Others consider what the business needs and appropriate SEO to the business needs. So in other words, some SEOs view SEO as more important than the business. Others consider the brand more important than, or the business more important than SEO. In terms of the balance of the two, where do you put the emphasis of SEO? Is it SEO for a business or the business doing SEO best practices, if that makes any sense at all?
I'm trying to think of some scenarios potentially with that, but I don't see the two things as sort of mutually exclusive. Like you either do this or you either do that. Like, I don't know, you're either going to focus on local SEO or you're also going to fix your redirects. Like, I don't know, like it's just, I think if these are some of the questions, then there is maybe a deeper sort of problem in terms of just understanding the basics and understanding what is the purpose of SEO. And personally, if I would come across a business and when I work with businesses where prioritizations are more challenging, where maybe, you're talking to different teams, then a lot of times I think it's really valuable to take a step back and to look at that business and evaluate the maturity, right? Where just in terms of like, where is their understanding? Because maybe that education will be more beneficial in the first place, because, maybe the redirects are being created by a content team who has no idea that actually they shouldn't they shouldn't just update URLs all the time, which is what they are doing. And I've come across businesses like that. It was a few years ago now, but still that happened. And maybe, you've been looking at this small part of like, oh, I need to update all of these redirects and I need to do all of this, but you need to dig deeper because maybe this issue is coming from a completely separate part of the business that can be fixed with education, that can be stopped. And I think that's why when things get a bit overwhelming or they don't make sense as an SEO, and you're kind of starting to pull your hair out because you're getting those sort of hated questions of like, oh, so when are we going to rank on page 1 and things like that? Like, instead of trying to immediately do something and fix something, just take a step back, ask more questions, evaluate, and really have a think about that long-term goal. Because the one thing we know with SEO is that it's not a quick fix. It's not a short-term thing. It's not something you turn on and then you turn off and then you turn on again when you need it. So yeah, really looking at the bigger picture can be really helpful. And then you can fix, all of those things at sort of not simultaneously or together, or they will somehow overlap because there will be other challenges in the business that are causing those problems.
Brilliant. Petra, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating speaking with you. I feel we can go on for another hour, but I'm just conscious of your time. What are you looking forward to this year for the rest of the year?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been great chatting to you, and I've, as I mentioned, I've been on sort of a work sabbatical now for the last 4 months. So actually been doing just personal SEO projects. So I think for the rest of the year, what I'm looking forward to is that in about a month's time, I will get back to consulting and freelancing, which will be very interesting. And I'm very excited to see how this sort of work sabbatical and traveling and talking to different markets, different people about SEO, how that will actually come into, how I work with people. So that's a personal thing from the industry. I think there is just so much change happening with AI, which I personally find very interesting. And there are obviously just a huge amount of conversations happening. So I'm following those closely as well.
Yeah, the next 1 to 3 years, I think, in search is going to be very disruptive and fascinating to see how it all shapes out. Petra, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you online?
So I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram as well, if anyone interested in travel content. But yeah, my Twitter is chameleon_JRNL, as in Chameleon Journal, which is chameleonjournal.com. That's my website. Also on LinkedIn, so people can connect with me there and say hi.
Awesome. I'll have those links in the description for you. Thanks a lot, Petra.
Thank you.
Have a brilliant day.
Thanks
and
again.
We'll catch up again another time.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Cheers.